My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I'm about to tell you, because if I don't get this out now, I'll take these secrets to my grave. And trust me, that grave might come sooner than I'd like. I was 17 when they first approached me in the streets of Guadalajara. My family was broke, my father had abandoned us, and my mother was working 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I was angry, desperate, and stupid enough to think I had nothing to lose. That's exactly what they look for. The guy who recruited me called himself Flaco. Skinny guy, maybe in his 30s, with scars on his hands and dead eyes that seemed to look right through you. He found me selling stolen car parts behind a mechanic shop in Tlaquepaque. Instead of threatening me or trying to scare me, he bought me lunch. Real food, not the scraps I'd been living on. "You've got potential, kid," he said, watching me devour a plate of carnitas like I hadn't eaten in days. "But you're wasting it on small-time shit. You want to make real money? You want to take care of your mother properly?" I should have walked away. Should have known that nothing good comes from men like Flaco. But when you're desperate, when you've got nothing but empty pockets and an empty stomach, those words sound like salvation. The recruitment process wasn't what you see in movies. There was no dramatic initiation, no blood oaths or ceremonies. It started small. Flaco would give me 50 pesos to deliver a package from one part of the city to another. No questions asked, no looking inside, just delivery. After a month of these runs, the packages got bigger, the money got better. 100 pesos, then 200. Soon I was making more in a week than my mother made in a month. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what was in those packages. The first time I held a gun, my hands shook so bad I could barely grip it. Flaco laughed at me. "Everyone's nervous the first time, Guerito. That's normal. The ones who aren't nervous are the ones you need to worry about." He taught me to shoot in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Bottles first, then targets, then moving targets. My aim was natural, almost instinctive. Flaco noticed. "You're different," he said one afternoon after I'd put 6 rounds dead center in a target from 50 meters away. "Most of these pendejos can't hit the broadside of a barn. But you've got the gift." That's when I met him for the first time. The man they called El Patron. Not the big boss everyone knew about, not El Mencho or any of the faces you see on wanted posters. This was someone different. Someone who operated in the shadows. He was maybe 50 years old, well-dressed but not flashy. The kind of man who could walk into any upscale restaurant in Mexico City and blend in perfectly with the businessmen and politicians. Clean-shaven, expensive watch, shoes that probably cost more than most people make in a year. But his eyes were like looking into an empty well. "So you're the kid Flaco's been telling me about," he said, his voice calm and measured. We were in a safe house in Zapopan, just the 3 of us. No guards, no weapons visible, but I could feel the danger radiating from this man like heat from a furnace. He walked around me slowly, studying me like I was a piece of meat he was considering buying. "You know what separates a good soldier from a dead soldier?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Intelligence. Any pendejo can pull a trigger. But knowing when to pull it, when not to pull it, when to walk away, that's what keeps you breathing." That was my real introduction to the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. Not through some dramatic ceremony or blood ritual, but through a quiet conversation with a man whose name I still don't know, in a house that looked like it belonged to a suburban family. Over the next few months, El Patron became my teacher. Not just in violence, but in thinking. He taught me about the business of drugs, about supply chains and territories, about corruption and politics. He showed me how the cartel wasn't just a gang of thugs with guns, but a sophisticated organization with international reach. "The Americans see us as animals," he said during one of our sessions. "Wild beasts who kill for sport. They don't understand that this is business. Everything we do serves a purpose. Every death, every territory we take, every official we buy, it's all part of a larger strategy." He was right. The CJNG wasn't like the old cartels that fought over scraps and killed each other over personal disputes. This was different. This was organized. The structure was unlike anything I'd imagined. Everyone thinks they know how cartels work. You see the boss at the top, lieutenants below him, soldiers at the bottom. But that's just the surface, the part they let you see. The real power structure of CJNG was built like a corporation with El Patron at the center of it all. He wasn't the visible leader. That was someone else's job. Someone who could take the heat and draw attention while the real decisions were made in shadows. Below El Patron were what he called sector chiefs, men and women who controlled different aspects of the operation. One handled logistics and transportation. Another managed corruption and political contacts. A third oversaw recruitment and training. A fourth controlled the financial networks that laundered their money through legitimate businesses. I learned that the violent, chaotic image of CJNG was partially manufactured. Yes, they were capable of incredible brutality when necessary, but most of their success came from being smarter than their competitors. While other cartels were fighting bloody wars in the streets, CJNG was buying politicians, establishing international connections, and building a supply network that stretched from Colombia to Chicago. My role in this machine was specific. I was what they called a cleaner. When problems arose that couldn't be solved through negotiation or bribery, that's when they called me. My first real job came 3 months after meeting El Patron. A local police commander in Tijuana had been taking money from CJNG for years, but recently he'd gotten greedy. Instead of just looking the other way, he'd started demanding a bigger cut and threatening to expose some of their operations if he didn't get it. "This is a test," El Patron told me as we sat in his office overlooking the city. "This commander thinks he can extort us because he believes we need him more than he needs us. He's forgotten that we made him rich and we can make him dead just as easily." The job was planned meticulously. They'd been watching the commander for weeks, learning his routines, his weaknesses, his habits. He had a mistress in Zona Norte, a young girl from Guatemala who worked in one of the clubs. Every Tuesday night he would visit her apartment above a taco shop. I remember everything about that night. The smell of grilled meat from the shop below, the sound of traffic on Avenida Revolucion, the weight of the pistol in my jacket pocket. I waited in the shadows across the street until I saw his car pull up. He was predictable, just like they said he'd be. Same time, same parking spot, same cocky walk as he headed up the narrow stairs to her apartment. I gave him 20 minutes, then followed. The door wasn't locked. Amateurs always think their routines keep them safe, but routines are what get you killed. I could hear them in the bedroom, hear her laughing at something he said. When I walked in, he was sitting on the edge of the bed in his underwear, counting money from his wallet, probably paying her for the night. She saw me first and started to scream, but I held a finger to my lips and shook my head. Smart girl. She went quiet. The commander turned around, saw me standing there with the gun, and his face went through every emotion at once. Surprise, fear, anger, then resignation. "You're making a mistake," he said, trying to sound official even in his underwear. "I'm a police commander. People will look for me." "No," I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. "People will forget about you." I shot him twice in the chest. Clean, professional, no unnecessary suffering. The girl started crying, but she didn't scream. Good. Screaming would have complicated things. "You didn't see anything," I told her. "You were never here tonight. Go stay with your family for a few weeks. When you come back, find a different job." She nodded, grabbed her clothes, and ran. I stood there for a moment, looking down at the commander's body. I expected to feel something, guilt, remorse, satisfaction, something. But there was nothing. Just emptiness and the distant sound of music from the club downstairs. That was the moment I realized I was good at this. Too good. Word got back to El Patron quickly. The next morning, he called me to his office with a smile on his face. "Clean work," he said. "Professional. No witnesses, no complications, no mess for us to clean up. The commander's death will be written off as a robbery gone wrong, and his replacement will be someone we already own." He walked to his desk and pulled out an envelope thick with cash. "Your fee plus a bonus. But more importantly, you've proven yourself. You're ready for bigger things." That's how I became one of CJNG's primary enforcers. Over the next 2 years, I carried out jobs across Mexico and into Central America. Politicians who tried to double-cross the cartel. Rival dealers who wouldn't respect territorial boundaries. Business owners who refused to pay protection money. Each job was planned carefully, executed professionally, and cleaned up completely. But it wasn't just about killing. El Patron taught me that violence was just one tool in a larger toolkit. Sometimes the threat of violence was more effective than violence itself. Sometimes a well-placed rumor or a strategic leak of information could accomplish more than a bullet. I learned about the cartel's international operations, their connections with Colombian suppliers, their distribution networks in the United States, their money laundering operations in Asia. CJNG wasn't just a Mexican problem. It was a global enterprise with tentacles reaching into every major city in North and South America. The scope of their corruption was staggering. They had people in every level of government, from local police chiefs to federal prosecutors to politicians in Mexico City. They owned judges, generals, and governors. In some states, they didn't just influence the government, they were the government. But the most shocking thing I learned was about El Patron himself. He wasn't Mexican. He wasn't even Latin American. He was an American, a former DEA agent who'd gone rogue in the 1990s and used his knowledge of law enforcement tactics to build the most sophisticated criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. His real name was Michael Harrison, and he'd been presumed dead for over a decade after his cover was blown during an operation in Colombia. Instead of returning to the United States, he disappeared into the criminal underworld and eventually made his way to Mexico, where he'd helped transform CJNG from a regional gang into an international powerhouse. The war on drugs is theater, he told me one night as we watched news coverage of another big seizure by Mexican authorities. Politicians need to show they're fighting, so we give them victories to celebrate. We sacrifice a few shipments, let them arrest some low-level dealers, and they get to hold press conferences talking about their success. Meanwhile, 10 times more product gets through. He was right. For every shipment that got seized, for every arrest that made headlines, dozens of other operations continued uninterrupted. The authorities were fighting shadows, while the real business happened elsewhere. The money was incredible. In 2 years, I made more than most people see in a lifetime. I bought my mother a house, sent my little sister to private school, and had enough saved to live comfortably for years. But the money came with a price that I was only beginning to understand. You can't do what I did without it changing you. Each job made the next one easier. Each death made life seem a little less valuable. I found myself becoming the kind of person I'd once been afraid of. The isolation was the worst part. I couldn't have normal relationships because I couldn't tell people what I really did for work. I couldn't trust anyone outside the organization because trust could get you killed. And I couldn't trust most people inside the organization either because betrayal was always a possibility. But the real breaking point came when El Patron gave me a job that crossed a line I didn't even know I had. A federal prosecutor in Mexico City had been getting too close to some of CJNG's financial operations. Her investigation was threatening to expose several of their money laundering networks, including some that involved legitimate businesses and respected community leaders. She's smart, El Patron said as he handed me her file. Too smart for her own good. She's uncovered connections that took us years to build, and she's not responding to the usual incentives. I looked at the photos in the file. Ana Lucia Morales, 42, years old, divorced, no children. She'd spent her entire career fighting organized crime, had survived 3 assassination attempts, and kept working despite constant death threats. Have you tried buying her off? I asked. El Patron smiled grimly. First thing we tried. She sent the money back with a note saying she couldn't be purchased. We tried threatening her family, but she doesn't have any family left to threaten. Parents dead, no siblings, ex-husband lives in Spain. She's got nothing to lose, which makes her dangerous. So you want her eliminated? I want her stopped, permanently. I studied the file for several minutes, learning her routines, her security arrangements, her habits. She was careful but not paranoid. Professional but not untouchable. When do you want it done? Soon, but there's one complication. She's been working with American authorities, sharing information about our operations across the border. Her death needs to look natural or it'll bring too much attention from the DEA and FBI. That's when I should have said no. That's when I should have walked away, but I didn't. I took the job. Ana Lucia Morales was murdered in her apartment on a Thursday night in November. The official cause of death was a heart attack brought on by a previously undiagnosed heart condition. The toxicology report found traces of a rare South American plant extract that mimics the symptoms of cardiac arrest and breaks down in the body within hours of death. It was a perfect kill. Clean, untraceable, and completely believable. The American authorities accepted the official findings. Her investigation was quietly transferred to someone more amenable to negotiation, and CJNG's financial networks remained intact. But something happened to me that night. As I watched the life leave her eyes, as I saw this woman who'd spent her career fighting for justice die alone in her apartment, something inside me broke. I realized that I'd become exactly what she'd been fighting against. I wasn't just a criminal anymore. I was a killer of good people. Someone who eliminated anyone who threatened the flow of drugs and money and corruption that was poisoning my country. That night, I made a decision that would eventually force me to run for my life. I started keeping records. Every job, every meeting, every order from El Patron, I documented all of it. Names, dates, locations, amounts of money, methods used. I told myself it was insurance, a way to protect myself if things went bad. But really, I think I was preparing for the day when I'd finally have the courage to do the right thing. The records revealed the true scope of CJNG's operations. They weren't just trafficking drugs. They were trafficking people, weapons, even organs harvested from their victims. They had partnerships with terrorist organizations in the Middle East, money laundering agreements with Russian organized crime, and corruption networks that reached into the highest levels of government in multiple countries. But the most damaging information was about El Patron himself, his real identity, his background with the DEA, the specific methods he'd used to build CJNG's intelligence and counterintelligence capabilities. This information could destroy not just the cartel, but expose the failure of American drug enforcement efforts and the corruption that enabled organizations like CJNG to flourish. For months, I gathered evidence while continuing to work for them. It was the most dangerous thing I'd ever done, but I couldn't stop. Every new piece of information felt like a step toward redemption, toward undoing some of the damage I'd helped cause. The end came suddenly. El Patron called me to a meeting at a ranch outside Guadalajara. It was supposed to be a routine briefing about territorial expansion into Michoacán, but something felt wrong from the moment I arrived. There were too many guards, too many vehicles, too much tension in the air. El Patron was waiting for me in the main house, but he wasn't alone. 3 men I didn't recognize stood behind him, their faces hidden by shadow, but their intentions clear from their posture. "We need to talk," El Patron said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. That's when I knew my time was up. Somehow they discovered what I was doing. Maybe someone had seen me photographing documents. Maybe they'd noticed my questions about operations that didn't concern me. Maybe they'd just developed suspicions about my recent behavior. "You've been busy," he said, walking to his desk and pulling out a familiar-looking notebook. My stomach dropped. It was one of my record books, the one I thought I'd hidden safely in my apartment. "Interesting reading," he continued, flipping through pages filled with my handwriting. "Very detailed, very thorough. The kind of thoroughness that could cause problems for a lot of people." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I'd been caught and we both knew what that meant. "The question now is what to do about it," El Patron said. "You know too much to simply disappear. Your death would raise questions, bring attention we don't need. But you've also proven that you can't be trusted." He closed the notebook and set it on the desk. "So I'm going to give you a choice. You can die tonight, here, quickly and cleanly. Or you can run. Leave Mexico, leave everything behind and never come back. Never speak to authorities, never contact anyone from your old life. Never surface anywhere we might find you. And if I choose to run, then you get a 12-hour head start before we begin hunting you. And make no mistake, we will hunt you. Not just CJNG, but every criminal organization we have relationships with. You'll be marked for death from Tijuana to Buenos Aires. Your only chance of survival is to disappear so completely that you cease to exist." I looked around the room at the 3 men behind him, at the weapons I could see partially, concealed under their jackets. I thought about Ana Lucia Morales, about all the other people whose deaths I'd caused, about my mother and sister who would never understand why I suddenly vanished from their lives. "I'll run." El Patron nodded. "Smart choice. Your 12 hours start now." I walked out of that house knowing I'd never see Mexico again, knowing I'd never see my family again, knowing that for the rest of my life I'd be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the day when they finally caught up with me. But I also walked out with something they didn't know I had. Backup copies of all my records, hidden in places they'd never think to look, along with detailed instructions for their delivery to American authorities if anything happened to me. The next few days were a blur of border crossings, false documents, and careful movement through networks of smugglers and coyotes who asked no questions as long as the money was good. I made it into the United States through a tunnel near Nogales, then worked my way east using freight trains and long-distance trucks. For 6 months, I lived like a ghost. No permanent address, no real name, no contact with anyone from my previous life. I worked construction jobs paid in cash, slept in cheap motels, and moved constantly. Always watching, always ready to run. But the paranoia was eating me alive. Every sound at night could be them coming for me. Every stranger who looked at me twice could be a scout. Every phone call to the wrong number could be a trap. That's when I made the decision that saved my life and damned my soul at the same time. I contacted the FBI. The meeting was arranged through intermediaries, people who specialized in connecting fugitives with federal authorities. It took place in a safe house in Denver, with agents from multiple agencies present. FBI, DEA, ATF, even representatives from Homeland Security. I gave them everything. The locations of safe houses, the names of corrupted officials, the details of trafficking routes, the financial networks used for money laundering. But most importantly, I gave them Michael Harrison. The reaction was immediate and intense. They'd been looking for Harrison for over 15 years, assuming he was dead. Learning that he was not only alive but running one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world was the kind of intelligence coup that makes careers. Within weeks, they'd begun dismantling CJNG's operations. Raids on safe houses, arrests of key personnel, seizures of massive drug shipments. The organization that had seemed untouchable was suddenly bleeding from a dozen wounds. But they couldn't touch Harrison himself. By the time they moved against the cartel's leadership, El Patron had vanished. Some say he fled to South America. Others believe he's hiding in Asia under a new identity. A few think he's dead, killed by rivals who blamed him for the organization's sudden vulnerability. I don't know which theory is true, but I know he's still out there somewhere. And I know that eventually he'll come for me. The federal authorities kept their end of our bargain. New identity, new life, witness protection that's supposed to keep me safe indefinitely. But I know better than to trust completely in their ability to protect me from someone like Michael Harrison. So here I am years later, telling you this story, living under a name that isn't mine, in a place I can't tell you about, working a job that has nothing to do with violence or death or the international drug trade. Sometimes I dream about my old life, about my mother, about my sister, about the streets of Guadalajara where I grew up. But those dreams always turn into nightmares about the people I killed, the lives I destroyed, the corruption I enabled. I tell myself that what I did at the end, the information I provided to authorities, somehow balances out the evil I participated in. But I know that's not true. Nothing can balance out what I did. Nothing can bring back the people who died because of my actions. The authorities tell me that my information led to the disruption of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in history. They say that hundreds of lives were saved because drug shipments were intercepted, because trafficking routes were shut down, because corrupt officials were removed from power. Maybe that's true. Maybe some good came from my betrayal of the people who trusted me with their secrets. But at night when I can't sleep, I think about Ana Lucia Morales. I think about the police commander in Tijuana. I think about all the others whose names I've tried to forget but never will. I was a killer for CJNG. I was good at it and I profited from it, and I convinced myself that it was just business. But business built on death and suffering and the destruction of communities is never just business. If you're listening to this, if you're someone who might be tempted by the easy money and false respect that comes with joining organizations like CJNG, I want you to understand something. There is no exit from that world that doesn't cost you everything you care about. You might think you're smart enough, tough enough, or lucky enough to avoid the consequences. You might think you can take their money and walk away when you've had enough. You might think you can compartmentalize the violence and keep some part of yourself clean. You're wrong. The cartel doesn't just take your labor. It takes your soul. Every job makes the next one easier. Every compromise makes the next one inevitable. Every death you cause or witness or ignore chips away at your humanity until there's nothing left but emptiness and the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, you can find a way back to being human again. I'm still looking for that way back. Still trying to figure out if redemption is possible for someone who's done the things I've done. Still hoping that maybe by telling this story I can warn others away from the path I chose. But I'm also still running. Still looking over my shoulder. Still waiting for the day when Michael Harrison or someone like him finds me and decides that my usefulness as an informant doesn't outweigh the threat I represent as someone who knows too much. Maybe that day will come soon. Maybe it will come years from now. Maybe, if I'm very lucky, it will never come at all. But if it does come, if you hear that someone matching my description was found dead under suspicious circumstances, I want you to know that this confession is real. The information I've shared is true. And the organization I helped expose is just one of many that continue to operate in the shadows, corrupting governments, destroying communities, and turning young people like I once was into killers. The war on drugs isn't a war between good and evil. It's a business relationship between suppliers and consumers, with governments and criminal organizations serving as middle management. The real victims are the communities caught in between, the families destroyed by addiction, the children recruited as soldiers, the honest officials killed for doing their jobs. I was part of that machine. I fed it with violence and death and corruption. And even though I eventually tried to stop it, even though I risked everything to provide information to authorities, I know that somewhere else, in some other city, some other young person is being recruited just like I was. They're being offered easy money and false respect. They're being told that they can take care of their families, that they can have power and influence, that they can be somebody important. What they're not being told is the real price. What they're not being told is that the easy money comes with compound interest that can never be fully repaid. What they're not being told is that the respect is built on fear, and fear is a foundation that always crumbles eventually. If you're that young person, if someone like Flaco or El Patron is making you promises about a better life, I'm begging you to walk away. Find another path. any other path, because the path I chose led me to a place where I have no name, no family, no home, and no peace, where I live every day knowing that I'm responsible for deaths that didn't need to happen and suffering that didn't need to exist. That's the real price of working for the cartels. Not just the risk of death or imprisonment, but the certainty that you'll lose yourself completely in the process. And once you're lost, finding your way back is almost impossible. Almost, but not completely. That small possibility of redemption is what keeps me going. What gives me hope that maybe this confession will serve some purpose beyond just unburdening my conscience. Maybe someone will hear this story and make a different choice. Maybe someone will decide that no amount of money is worth becoming what I became. Maybe someone will choose to fight the cartels instead of joining them, to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. If that happens, if even one person chooses a different path because of what I've told you, then maybe there's still some hope for redemption after all. But even if there isn't, even if I'm damned beyond salvation, at least the truth is out there now. The truth about CJ&G, about Michael Harrison, about how these organizations really operate and what they really cost the people who serve them. Use that truth however you can. Share it with anyone who needs to hear it. Fight against the corruption and violence and despair that these organizations spread wherever they go. And remember that everyone who works for the cartels was once someone's child, someone's hope for a better future. They didn't start out as monsters. They were made into monsters by a system that offers no other choices to people born into poverty and desperation. If you want to defeat the cartels, don't just fight their soldiers. Fight the conditions that create their soldiers. Give young people alternatives to crime. Give communities alternatives to corruption. Give countries alternatives to the drug war that has failed so completely and caused so much suffering. That's the only way this cycle will ever end. That's the only way people like me will stop being created. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you understand what I've told you, and that you do something with that understanding. The cartels are counting on your silence, on your indifference, on your willingness to look the other way as long as the violence doesn't touch your own life directly. Don't give them that gift. Fight back, speak out, make different choices. And remember that somewhere out there, someone like me is hoping that you will.